Hello, Andy. Hello, Cal. Welcome to our second A Bit Lit chit chat, where we're going to check in on how things have gone over the past 3 months of A Bit Lit. I thought we should maybe start by introducing ourselves for anyone who hasn't seen one of these before. So I'm Emma Whipday. I'm a lecturer in Renaissance literature at Newcastle University. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, I'm Andy Kesson. I lecture at the University of Roehampton in southwest London. And like the two of you, I work in the early modern period, usually around, but not exactly on Shakespeare.
And hello, I'm Callan Davies. I'm a researcher at the University of Kent. And as Andy said, I also work on that broadly on that area, the early modern period.
Lovely. And I think that one of the nice things about A Bit Lit so far has been that we've been able to sort of work on a much wider range of things by talking to people who do talk about Shakespeare and do talk about the early modern and early modern adjacent things, but who also take us on these sort of much bigger journeys of topics. And maybe we could touch on some of those in a moment. But I thought we could just start by reflecting on the fact that our first video like this, I checked, I think it was on March the 23rd. So lockdown had just started, and we look slightly startled in the video because it's all brand new, and we're still coming to terms with it. And now it is July, and it has been over 3 months of lockdown. And how have you found A Bit Lit during that as a way of getting outside of lockdown on our screens?
Yeah.
Well, I was just reflecting on what you're saying about Zoom there. It is interesting how, at the start, it feels like quite a novel thing to be talking, as everybody was finding in their workplaces, to be talking through this medium that we will have used, but isn't the central mode for kind of conversation for us. Whereas now this feels like a completely natural way to be having these discussions. And so, yeah, that kind of technology aspect to it is interesting because for me, at least, it feels much more comfortable talking like this now. And I guess you kind of find ways and strategies to do it and to make it work.
Yeah, and you're right. It's this kind of particular configuration on screen to begin with. Every time I saw it, I thought of A Bit Lit because that was how I zoomed and how I saw Zoom. And now it's just ubiquitous. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day about how weird it is to only know some people on Zoom and whether it impedes how well you can kind of get a connection. And then he pointed out that we only knew each other on Zoom, which I'd failed to realize. So I think that really is a sign of how much, Zoom has actually become a stand-in for proper sort of interpersonal connection. Do you find that, Andy?
Well, I mean, this experience does feel quite novel to me because this is my first time certainly doing an A Bit Lit where I haven't been the one pressing record and worrying about hosting and all that. So actually this feels quite strange and I don't quite know. Quite often when we're doing A Bit Lits as an interviewer, I feel like I don't quite know when I should speak. And I've really enjoyed discovering that actually I don't need to speak very much at all. And suddenly it's kind of odd to be being interviewed almost as a guest. So yeah, this feels kind of novel to me, but certainly A Bit Lit has been the most amazing energy boost for me. And Emma, right at the start, you talked about hope-making activities, a phrase which has never left me at a time when we were feeling pretty worried and anxious about the world for good reason. And A Bit Lit's been really, really good for my my energy levels and my reconnection with colleagues, but also seeing new connections and collaborations forming across films and from different contributors. And I'm really pleased we're making this film soon after Callan's video with Laura Sanger and Mark Hailwood, who picked up on one of the ideas we pitched right at the start of where the parish is. We were talking about the early modern period being a time of plague and the parish kind of wanting to leap to the defense of individuals and individual parts of the community. And we were asking, where is that parish and what would a digital parish look like? And it's been really wonderful, certainly for me, just to be able to hang out with both friends, but also with people I've never met before and to soak up all of their brilliant ideas and enthusiasms and passions. And just to learn. Absolutely.
And I love that idea of the digital parish because I think there's so much of an emphasis on sort of specific boundaries of countries, or ideas about local lockdowns, suggesting very sort of tightly drawn boundaries around particular areas. And there's also a lot of language of communities, I feel like, in the press at the moment. And when they say community, they mean a very particular, distinct, defined group of people. But of course, communities aren't like that. They're sort of wide and disparate and can bring new people into them. And it's felt really nice having a sort of, as you say, a digital community that allows for existing connections, but also for building new and maybe unexpected connections as well. And I was interested by what you said, Andy, about the idea that there are kind of add-on effects after a bit video when new connections are being made between contributors. Or would you like to say any more about that, about the kind of ripple effects of it?
Yeah, some of them are too early to talk about, and some of them are not my place to share. So I guess I won't say anything very specific. But I mean, in a way, that video that Callan made with Mark and Laura is a great example. And Mark Helwood and Laura Sanger were talking about one of the weird things when you share your work digitally, in their case via a website, you don't quite know who your audience is. And I quite like that. I quite like the idea that you don't quite know who might be getting benefit from you sharing work. But you know, the moment that they themselves then started referring to our earlier films, they outed themselves as our audience and then continued that conversation. And for me, that was just perfect and really exciting. And certainly in my own experience working with Callan on the Before Shakespeare project, where we had a website, and I was told by Jennifer Richards, a colleague of yours, Emma, years and years ago when I was writing the funding bid for Before Shakespeare, she said to me, "You must have a website." And I went, "Okay, I must have a website." And I put it down on the list of outputs, thinking, we'll just have a website and I won't really know what that would look like. And Callan designed this brilliant website, and then suddenly we all started writing for it. And it was really exciting. And the big thing I learned from that was something that, again, that Mark and Laura were talking about. The moment you start writing for a public audience, your style changes, your rhetorical decisions changes, the potential content may change as well. But crucially, although you're writing for what you think of as a public, you very quickly start writing things which are much more useful for scholars in other disciplines and other time periods. So in Before Shakespeare's case, we've had art historians, we've had performers, we've had archaeologists responding to our work in a way which I just don't think would have happened otherwise. And I guess I sort of hope that's what might be happening with A Bit Lit. So I'm sorry, Emma, I'm not giving you specifics because I don't feel like I can. But just to think about our community of, I mean, I've had early modernists write to me with the phrase, "Love those wrestlers." I've had several people write the 3-word phrase, "Love those wrestlers." And I just don't believe that would have happened if we'd stuck to traditional scholarly forms of communication. And this idea of hosting and platforming a wide range of different kinds of practitioners and researchers, I hope it's really exciting. I'm really enjoying the early career voices that we're giving platforms to. It's been wonderful having more high-profile people as well. But just putting these films out there. And I'll start up in a minute, but I guess the last thing I'll say in reply to what Emma said is, you know, when we started doing this, we had absolutely no idea if anyone would watch the films. And in a way, we didn't really care. We were thrilled if people were going to watch the films. But in a way, it was an experiment just to see what we might be able to do and the conversations we might be able to create. So it's not to say we were trying to avoid an audience, because we were absolutely seeking it, but it was also an end in itself, in that it was just seeing what this platform might do for us and just having conversations that brought us hope. I like that mix of audience facing, but also just an experiment, which would be fine even if it went wrong, in the sense that no one watched it. That would have been okay too, and it would have been a legitimate outcome of an experiment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're right that there's an element of this where it's just been a treat having the interviews and talking to people. And yes, you have the audience in mind, and it's always a joy to realize that other people are watching and responding to, but there's also the selfish pleasure in just getting to have these conversations. And I think that's such a good point about the idea that when we're only in our little disciplinary and subject specific groups, then it's not just excluding people who are sort of members of the public, however that might be defined, but it's also excluding people who have different areas of expertise but might not speak the exact language. And so the interdisciplinarity and playfulness of thinking about, say, wrestling as performance is really exciting. And Cal, I know you've been sort of thinking in these ways a lot before Shakespeare, but also with your Thintrest series, where I was feeling quite impressed about the fact that when I had a Bitlit series for Stay at Home Shakespeare, I just thought of, I'll have a series and it will be me and I will be the series. Well, you instantly thought you'd have a Thintrest series that starts with you and then commission other things and kind of, make connections.
Work.
That's a very good
invite other
point.
people in to do some work.
But so was that was materiality and sort of object focused things, was that something you knew from the start of Bitlit was going to be a strand and an interest for you?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting, to go back about the kind of format or medium that we're using here. There is something different about doing this on a video than doing it as a podcast. And one of the things that it brings is a kind of, I guess, a physicality. And I was struck, obviously, I was looking over some of the videos this week and sort of returning to somebody like Alison Bomber's conversation with Andy, which is really full of physical energy. It has a dramatic quality to it, because that's what the subject of the conversation is. And that's something that you can kind of bring through with this. And I think, it's interesting to think about materiality in a medium that is expressly digital and to some degree immaterial, and to kind of have those conversations and to think about how can we showcase and talk about objects. And our editor, the editor behind this, James O'Prey, has been fantastic in bringing some of these materials in their kind of digital form and sewing them into the video so that when something comes up, we can see it. Playing around with flying coconuts, which is amazing. So that kind of play about, this could be really abstract, but actually all of our conversations have been rooted in some kind of material and physical expression. And I think that's quite welcome as well, because we're living all of our lives in this weird digital realm. So Absolutely. To root it in some kind of, theme is welcome.
And I think it's a really good question to ask, the kind of, why have we chosen to do a video beyond the fact that we like to see each other's faces and the faces of the people we're talking to? And you're right, having those digital effects that allow us to think about almost the things that are lost in this medium, the materiality, the things that can be touched, and how that can be recreated through these really playful effects. Because I was struck with the work that James did on Stay at Home Shakespeare when, for example, I had a video about the weather. And so he transformed the screen so that the weather was happening digitally, which, maybe to someone who's used to playing with special effects, that seems very straightforward and obvious. But to me, it was sort of the medium and the message was sort of coming together in a really exciting way. And I suppose that's something that we're all interested in seeing more of in terms of thinking about. I know that when we began, lots of the conversations we had were with academics, just because we have a network of academics, and it happened to be academics who'd seen things on Twitter. And then we've kind of been developing outwards to engage with people, creative practitioners and wrestlers, people from a much wider range of fields. And that gives possibilities as well for future collaborations that maybe showcase some of that creativity. And so I thought that might be a nice point to sort of pivot to talking about what we see in our dreams for a Bitlit going forward. Do either of you have a sort of vision you want to share?
Well, I definitely want to hear from Callan more about the medium, because I think he's got some really wonderful things to say there. And certainly for me, it felt like it needed to be a video project. And I'm definitely a loudmouth. But I'm also weirdly shy, and I really don't like cameras. And it's taken me a long time, and I'm not sure I'm really there yet to feel happy about being plonked in front of a camera. But I do think the video, the addition of visual, even if the visual is just our obviously very lovely, but nevertheless just faces. I do think that's been important, and it simply gives people an option to watch if they want to. But I think a lot of people have been treating it as something that you listen to nevertheless. So it's nice, I think, just to have that option. And I think it has added something. And I don't know if I fully understand what the something is, other than the work that James has brought, that Emma has just been referring to. But I have been thinking a lot about a Bitlit as a sort of experiment in what you can do with Twitter, because so much of it is an exploitation of and a joyful celebration of the kinds of networking and community building which you can do online, which in our profession there's often a lot of sniffiness and snobbiness about. But certainly for me, it's been hugely important for how I think about who I am and how I work as an academic in an academic world. That's felt really important. So yeah, I've been thinking about this project as a kind of slightly odd experiment in what you can do with Twitter. which is not to say we only speak to people who are on Twitter. We haven't done that, but it's been an important starting point, I think. Emma, I feel like I'm not answering your question about where we go next.
No, but maybe we can go there in a moment and pause for a second actually on that, because you brought up, this tantalizing idea of Twitter and beyond and what other media there is. And Cal, I know you've been thinking about this and about, other platforms that could be used.
I mean, we were talking right at the outset of this project, if you're going to put out videos, how do you do that? And as you mentioned earlier, Andy, how do you know who your audience is, and does that matter? But also, how are you reaching an audience in the first place, whoever they may be? And of course, we naturally gravitated to YouTube, which is where the platform kind of sits. And then we were lucky to have Matt Martin come and create this amazing website for us, which creates a kind of home or a way of access for people who might not be on Twitter. So I think these kind of different hubs, I guess, in which you might access community and conversation are really important. But nonetheless, I think it's clear that the main kind of mouthpiece for us is through Twitter, and we're slowly finding our way. I think with Instagram, we kind of have an Instagram account, but it's perhaps it's taking its first steps to get there. I don't know. I think this comes back to this point that you were both making about where scholarly communication happens, where creative discussions happen, and how you bring people together. And Twitter is so, although there may well be sniffiness about it in some areas, it's such a usual way for us to kind of have these conversations, and there's a big community on there. And I guess I'm just kind of interested in what happens when we look beyond Twitter to people who simply aren't on that platform. And a lot of younger people do not dwell on Twitter. They dwell on lots of other types of social media sites. And and there's a kind of obviously always a link. Stephen Guide-Bray was talking about this in the video yesterday. There's form, and the subject matter are obviously connected. And so what does it mean if we start having types of conversations like these in a medium that's radically short, or film-wise radically short, or that works only in a kind of networked way, so that something is always in conversation with something else. So we've talked about things like TikTok and Instagram. I have no idea what that would look like, but I think it's an interesting kind of thought experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one of the exciting things about Twitter that it would be interesting to see how differently it would be replicated in other places is that there are already these sort of cutting edge scholarly conversations happening, where it's not that ideas are being disseminated on Twitter, but the ideas are actually sort of happening on Twitter. So I'm thinking of, for example, the race before race and shake race hashtags exploring sort of race in early modern studies. And so for us being able to put out videos and conversations about that speak directly to those hashtags is quite exciting. And it would be interesting to know what that would look like on Instagram or on TikTok, those kinds of, participating in the ongoing conversation that is fomenting out of those media. Brilliant. And so maybe that, sorry, Andy, did you have?
Well, I've got lots of things to say to what Callan and Emma said, and I suppose that last point Emma was making, I'm really excited about that, but I'm also kind of aware of the politics of it, and I'm really keen to get to invite more people to host and make their own films for us, because I am aware of our project as an all-white project, and I wonder about the kinds of privilege which are built into the ability to do a project like this, particularly at a time, at this particular historical moment. And this project's been hard work, it's been hard emotional, it's been hard workload kinds of work, but thinking about what's enabled us to do it and how we can embed other kinds of voices in the conversation. So I've been really excited to host conversations around race, for example, but also aware that we're the ones doing the hosting. Forgive, my phone is now ringing, ignore that. So yes, thinking about how we can hand over the platform, I think, to other voices, not just as guests, but as people leading the project forward a little bit. And that brings me back to Emma's earlier question about the future for the project. And I guess one of my thoughts there is that I don't know what the future of the project looks like, and I really like that. I want the project to be changed by our listeners and our viewers. I'm really interested to know what people would like us to do, and for them to suggest topics and suggest speakers, and as I say, suggest hosts for the videos. And I'm hoping that we will be reshaped. And that brings me back to Callan's point about Twitter as a mouthpiece. for the project. I also think Twitter's kind of an earpiece in that I learn from Twitter just as much, well, much more than I do kind of broadcast on it. And we, in our professional context, we're constantly being encouraged as scholars to engage with the public and to deliver what the government calls impact, which I always think is a weirdly aggressive, physical word. But we don't think much about how we get impacted by that process. And I'm really keen on the idea of iterative, two-way conversations which are mutually beneficial, in which expertise is pooled and shared, rather than this model of, the academic expert impacting the inexpert public. So I'm hoping that this project, and I think it's already happening, I'm hoping that this project will be one which is shaped and led by other people and other contributors and other guests and other audience members. I don't know if that chimes with how you guys are thinking for the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like, I mentioned in passing that clearly we like looking at each other's faces, but I feel like all of us would be quite happy to have our faces sort of out of the videos for a while, to just let other people have their faces. I think that, it's been a joy doing this and getting to have these conversations, but we're also very keen to kind of spread the joy, give the joy away, let other people who want to, create series, host videos, have particular themes running through, to get them the chance to have to platform them and sort of step back a bit ourselves and become the audience rather than the makers. Yeah. Does that speak to what you're thinking, kind of your dreams for a bit lit, Cal, or are there
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, completely second that. And I like that. I mean, this kind of comes back to what we were talking about just now, but a lot of the videos are not, by virtue of the fact that they're conversations, but also because of what's coming up in them. People are talking about kind of their process and being in the middle of research. And, this is not a kind of fixed thing that somebody is imparting or announcing. They're about the kind of fluidity of creativity, the fluidity of scholarly research. So a lot of the time, the whole thing feels like this ongoing conversation in which, we obviously want to invite people in to kind of lead that and keep it rolling on. I think all of the videos, they feel quite open-ended, and I quite like that, in the middles of things rather than at the ends. Even when somebody's talking about a book, Pascal, Stephen, everybody, there's a sort of, and the next thing is, here is what's going on in my head, and with the wrestlers too, about how they kind of work with their craft and develop it. And I quite like the idea that these things are always in flux and always in motion. And so, that in itself, I think, is democratic.
Totally. Yeah. And I've really enjoyed the fact that it's been so much about process, as you say, even for some people who are at the book launch stage, and some people who, Jess Hamlet, who's working sort of on her PhD right now and is in the middle of it. And it's nice getting those different kind of visions. But I feel like even people who've been speaking about finished projects. So I remember that Nora mentioned, she was talking about her Measure Still for Measure project, which she knows very well, but then mentioned the sort of vague stirrings of ideas she's having for her next project. And I feel like there's something about the informality of this that, I would never dare give an academic or creative talk where I talked publicly sort of at a stadium in front of a room about some vague ideas I half had. But that's how we all work, right? We're all simultaneously finishing things, beginning things, in the middle of things, and to get some of that messiness and that vague half-formedness into the conversation is really exciting.
And is it because of the spirit of offering up for conversation, right? You're not saying, here is a finished thought which you need to learn from. You're saying, here are some kind of opening questions and kind of reverberating pieces of evidence and ideas which haven't quite sat still for me, and I don't know where they belong in a future argument position, but here's where I'm at, and I'd love to hear more from you. And I feel like we've been really lucky that our contributors have really approached it in that spirit.
Absolutely.
And as we're speaking, I'm just looking very quickly through what we've done so far. Horrifyingly, we made more than 50 films in our first 3 months, which is ridiculous, and we all need to calm down. But thinking about, the issue of archival silence and what we do with it, that's come up again and again and again. Thinking about the intersection between history and English, history and literature is a really interesting through story. Stuff and objects, thanks to Cal in particular. Thinking about performance practice now, thanks to Emma. Queer and transgender narratives have really come to the fore. TV history, photography, filmmaking. I think it's really exciting to see those conversations develop. I'm just doing shout outs now in the hope of our viewers might go and watch some of these films. I hope I'm not being super boring. And I have really enjoyed we haven't quite got all of our films with actors in the traditional sense of the word up on our website, but they are coming. But I'm really looking forward to being able to move between films, between different kinds of practitioners, theatre makers, actors, and wrestlers. And I am someone who spent quite a long time speaking to actors about their craft. It's been really fascinating talking to wrestlers who are not often given spaces to talk about their craft, and I'm someone who's not used to speaking to them about their craft. It's been really interesting that, you know, both parts of that conversation, we're out of our comfort zones. But actually the sheer wealth of information you get about performance and belonging in a space in front of an audience has been really exciting, I think. And the same with conversations with people like Chris Good, thinking about, again, non-traditional kinds of theatre making. Yeah, we've just seen some fabulous conversations. I'll just shout one more out because I think it's great. The film that Emma made with Brooke Carlson, Dustin Regassa and Lisa Lockard about 21st century reading. I learned so much from that film, which is crazy because I've been doing 21st century reading since the year 2000. Yeah, I feel like people have been so generous and so incredibly revealing about their work and how it works. That's a very bad way of putting it.
Yeah, and the personal or intimate or tactile aspects of work. I feel like in that reading conversation, one of the really lovely things was everyone brought different disciplinary perspectives, but everyone was also so willing to take their disciplinary hats off and just talk about their kind of personal associations of reading. And I guess that's, you know, that question we ask at the end of all the BitLit videos of what is literature. On the one hand, it's obviously a huge question that tends to terrify people. And I feel there have been some really interesting responses about canon and about how, you know, which kind of, I guess, is another strand running through actually, kind of what are canonical texts, what are literary texts, how do we talk back to them as academics and also as creative practitioners. But the other thing that's come out in response to those questions is extremely personal senses of what literature is, what reading is, what performance is, and how it kind of shapes us.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Are there any further things we haven't touched on yet about things we'd like to see in the future? Because I mean, I know personally, I've loved the fact that I know that some of our videos have been used in schools and particularly for homeschooling. And I mean, I think we're all super aware that two of the kind of worlds that we're in or adjacent to, kind of education and theatre, are going through a horrendously difficult time at the moment. And it's felt really lovely to be able to have sort of joyous conversations about the things that excite us in the context of that, and to hope that, that in terms of schools and universities, that as people are pivoting to online, particularly in the university context, and it's a huge amount of stress and pressure, that all these wonderful people sharing their passion and their expertise might provide something to, I don't know, give a window outside usual way of looking at things while everything's so stressful. So I hope that in the coming months we can kind of keep that going, particularly if things continue to be so pressured and stressful and anxiety provoking, and keep that sort of hope making going. But are there any other things you're looking forward to?
Well, I guess I'd like to underline, and this is a super weird thing to say, that a lot of the joy certainly coming from me in this project is quite indignant and angry joy, relating to what you just said, Emma. And right at the beginning of lockdown, so many theatre practitioners and academics were saying, I don't know why my job matters anymore. And I found that heartbreaking, and I can't think of anything that matters as much as storytelling, both imaginatively and historically, in the present moment. And you know, certainly in the UK context where universities are being allowed to fail, it's the scientific departments of universities which are going to get us out of the current mess, but it's the humanities side of universities which will sustain us both before and after we get out of this mess. And we're seeing a moment in time where the world populace is turning to storytelling, and always has done, but in a very particular way at this moment. And I think this really rigorous, sustained, and very committed defense of fictional and non-fictional storytelling is a big part of what I hope A Bit Lit is doing. So sorry to reclaim our joy in terms of angry joy. It feels like a very me thing to have done, and a very thing to do, and I apologize. But championing love and creativity and collaboration and sharing at a time when we are feeling so isolated and segregated and have no access to these worlds is something that I'm really hopeful we do and will continue to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, Cal, do you want to speak to that at all?
Not at any length, I mean, other than to sort of champion it. But yeah, I mean, I think that as you say, Emma, you know, all working in these disciplines and adjacent to them, it's a really harrowing time. And so it's quite nice to be able to have that, to hear people talking about this without the kind of doom that hangs over, quite rightly, that hangs over this, and the alarm. But also just to think about that sense of collaboration, and sort of when you kind of scroll through the different tiles here, you're looking at people from lots of different creative backgrounds, lots of different scholarly traditions and backgrounds. And they kind of, yeah, they weave together into a web that I think really does speak to how humanities and the arts, how creativity, they're all really interconnected. And they're all really, I mean, the word productive, I guess, is problematic, but they're certainly fruitful. And I think it's really great to kind of hear from this, and in the future to hear about the fruits of this kind of work, because I think it really shows a kind of strength when you bring all this together. And I guess I'm excited to hear other ways in which other places where we might identify creativity that either don't normally fall under the arts, or that aren't as Andy was saying with wrestling, aren't the conversations we might normally have had to date in our working lives, you know, with gaming, with there's all sorts of really, really exciting areas, I think, that really testify to the urgency and the brilliance of work that's being done in the arts and humanities and the creative industries.
Absolutely, yeah.
I really want to get gaming part of the conversation. I am working on one film, but just if there's anyone listening who wants to talk to us about gaming, please do get in contact. And just in general, sorry, Emma, if it's all right to say, just anyone listening, please do get in contact with stories you'd like to hear about, stories you'd like to contribute. We want to be led by our audience.
Absolutely. And so I suppose the thing that's coming out of, I loved what both of you just said, and I suppose, yeah, the urgency of storytelling, and the irony of the fact that the theatres and the universities, the places that tell stories and help us make sense of stories and create community, all the things that in our current fragmented, digital, stressful, frightened state are the things we need most, are also the things that are most under threat. So yeah, I think, yeah, angry joy is definitely the name of what we're feeling and what's motivating us and propelling us at the moment. And I suppose that kind of leads us very nicely around to the final thing I was thinking maybe we could talk about, which was what this means to us personally, and what a bit lit has meant to us personally. And I think for me, you know, having on the one hand what in academic and creative terms is paradoxically almost a gift in the midst of all this, you know, stress and horror of just being quietly at home and being lucky enough to, you know, still have a job, to be able to still teach, to be able to have time to amid the crazy planning on how to move courses online, to think and read and write, and also to get to think pedagogically about how I can create community digitally, and how I can teach and also learn and be impacted digitally. Those are all sorts of questions that I'm asking in my work life, that I'm also asking in a bit lit, and that a bit lit's going to be seen completely different ways. But at the same time, a bit lit's allowed me to affirm the importance of research and creativity and of learning from other people at a time when everything could become quite instrumental, quite focused on, you know, teaching has to happen online. I want to see some of this theatre, so hopefully this theatre will keep going. I don't know. I feel like that the chance to have that kind of greater breadth of sort of conversations that don't have an end goal has been really precious. Andy or Cal, do you want to say what's meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess, again, you know, this week I was struck by something in a number of the videos. So I'm something that's weighing on my mind at the moment, quite understandably, is precarity. And so I'm on a short-term contract at Kent, and I'm in a very lucky position too. You know, I'm fine for the time being, but obviously it's something that you think about. And I found it really inspirational and encouraging to see the types of work that can be done and that is being done, that isn't defined by traditional modes of the academy, traditional modes of theatre. Just this sort of, this positivity about making and creating that makes me think that there is room for things, even when the traditional structures that you're trained in, that you're brought up to kind of working, might not be there. I find that quite exciting, because what can be a really, really terrifying situation is for everybody, who works in these industries right now. I don't know. I just think that there's ways to be creative about your own relationship to these things, and we simply have to hang on to both the anger about what's going on and to push back against it, but also to find these creative ways through. And so it makes me a bit more optimistic than I would be.
Yeah. In film number 6, Travis Lau gave this fantastic barnstorming speech about breaking out of the traditional scholarly mode of refuting and replacing each other. We often get trained to define our work in terms of whose other work it proves wrong, and instead thinking about positive, creative forms of collaboration. And I'm hopeful that speaks to the heart of lots of what all three of us have done in the past, but particularly of A Bit Lit. But it's a sort of showcasing of that spirit. And I like the fact that we don't have a producer, like a radio producer, saying to us, "You've got 10 minutes for this interview. You must hit the following talking points." That we can, part of our form is meandering and migration and moving back and forth. And certainly, I think all three of us try to make sure that the audience, that the content is as clear to the audience as possible. But apart from that, we don't really do much in the way of intervention. But I'm equally hopeful that A Bit Lit might be a good repository for TV and radio producers, and particularly researchers, when we're looking for new speakers on a particular topic. Because I think often radio and TV fall back to the same particular kinds of academic contributors. And I'm hoping our platform, sharing new voices, will be a really exciting place for those kinds of researchers and producers to turn to. So I've got lots of hopes in that direction. But for me, it's just been really lovely showcasing, but also exploring and perhaps testing the idea of always being in conversation and being in hopefully generous and fruitful and two-way conversations, which are not about, look at how much I know, which in my case wouldn't last very long if I tried to have one of those conversations, but instead about sharing and being ready to be transformed by what the other person knows.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's so true, that idea that the chance to have a discourse where you're not thinking, yes, so-and-so says this, but actually I say this, but where you can just listen and then maybe say, yes, I think that sounds amazing. And to have a chance not to have to do that kind of intellectual performing. Yeah. Because you're just talking. Yeah. I think that's wonderful.
In some of the films, Emma and Cal, some of my contributors have been very, supportive and positive about Shakespeare, and I have let that go.
Yeah, I'm astonished by how much of a Shakespeare strand we have running through A Bit Lit, considering how much I know he's not your favourite Andy. But I guess
a sign of my magnanimity.
And it's interesting how, simply because of how large he looms in culture, there are so many jumping off points and points. I feel like a lot of our Shakespeare videos aren't necessarily fully pro Shakespeare. They're sort of, talking back to, in conversation with, debating. Wonderful. Yes. Is there anything else anyone would like to say before we finish? Is there anything I've missed that you were dying to discuss?
Is there anything you wanted to say, Emma, in relation to the conversations we've had?
I think just that it's been really lovely today, getting the chance to revisit the original reasons that we started the project, those ideas about hope making, those ideas about connections, and thinking about how we've been able to do that through the videos, but also how they've generated these unexpected avenues, these unexpected thinkings about way we can go forward. And I guess I want to reiterate what you said, Andy, about please, people, let us know if you have storytelling you want to do, if you want to be on a video, host a video, if you want, there are things we want to pursue, then I guess that the worst thing for us would be to feel like this is kind of closing in as the three of us and our interests and our obsessions, wonderful as those interests and obsessions are. But I think being kind of opened up to what our audiences want to bring, and for us to become the audiences of what we're sort of hungry for.
Absolutely, yes. I guess the last thing I'll say, if it's all right, is this is kind of a sequel to a film we made 3 months ago, right at the beginning of lockdown, where the three of us got together and imagined what A Bit Lit might look like. And we're hoping to come back in 3 months' time, the future permitting, who knows what the future will hold, and do something similar and reflect back on where we've got to, where we might go next. And then the last thing I'll say is, I apologize for ruining the blue theme that the three of us have been keeping going so far. I didn't get that memo this time. Sorry.
Yes, because the original video we were all in blue, weren't we? Yes. All right. Next time, Andy, we will return to the unifying colour scheme. But maybe this is a visual representation of the unexpectedness of a bit lit and how it's not consistent, it's playful and yeah, goes in different directions. Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much, Andy and Cal. It's been a joy to chat to you about this.
Thank you.